So here we see the Freeway interface and a few job instances that have already been installed on the server. So once you've licensed the Algo, you'll get two things. You'll get a license key and a dashboard file. Go over to the New button. You'll select the Algo that you've licensed from the list here and click OK. So what this did is this just created this new row here, which represents a new instance of the Profiteer job. It also popped open these configuration variables. These are the global configuration variables for this job instance. And in this field right here for license key, you'll hit Control V, paste in your license key, and then you'll hit OK. Some of these other global config variables I will discuss later if there's time. And so I'm going to run this instance right here I've already set up. Start that. If we go look at the log, we're going to see here's the job. It tells you the version, and then it lists out a number of informational things, just some configuration options that are set up, and checks your license. And so basically the Algo is running at this point. It's that easy. Now, to interact with it, there's a visualization grid, and that's where that dashboard file comes into play. So you go over to this button right here, select New Dashboard from Template, select the file that you received, and that pops open the visualization grid for the Algo, which allows you to interact with it while it's running. Each of these rows represents a mapping of an instrument or a subset of instruments to a particular execution strategy with the associated variables and configuration options. Now, I'm going to kind of go down through an example here, and hopefully that illustrates how this works. So you double click on the instrument column, and that pops open Option City Matcher Editor. This allows you to specify the instruments that you want to map to this particular row. So we'll click New. We'll be looking at some bond options. So OZN's the symbol, O for options. We'll be looking at the March 2014 expiries. And let's say we're just interested in the calls. So here we have 122 calls that match this criteria. Click OK. So that value is now populated. We can hit Apply Changes, and that will apply the changes, and you can see that it also populates these breakout columns right here. Symbol goes here, expiry goes here. We didn't have a strike range in this case, so that's empty, and then we see that C is populated because we only have calls in this case. Now, these columns are simply here for convenience and for user readability. If you don't like them or you don't need that information, you can certainly configure this dashboard grid in any way you want by clicking on the wrench icon. And if you take a look at this dialog, you'll see that you can tweak any of these columns, you can remove them, change their ordering, etc. So now we get to Delta. So this is a very useful column that allows you to filter even further these instruments based on a delta range. You could also put in just one delta, but it would have to exactly match these options in order for that to work. So in this case, let's say that we're interested in options that are pretty close to the money. So we'll do 40 to 60 as our delta range. Now, the mirror options column, this is a checkbox, and if you check it, it allows you to mirror any of the strikes that would happen from these criteria onto the opposing option side. So in this case, the calls that match the 46 to delta range, we could also, by clicking this, pull in the puts that are on those same strikes. So I'm going to leave that unselected for now. And here, this is an important column, the Algo. This allows you to specify the particular execution strategy that you want to apply to these set of instruments. So here you'll see in the drop-down box we have standard I, and then we also have another Algo. Now, for the sake of this video, this particular option probably shouldn't be here. This is actually a proprietary strategy for one of my clients. Standard I is the one that comes by default, and this is an extensible part of the Profiteer engine where multiple execution strategies can be developed for it. It's easily extensible so that if anyone has a particular proprietary idea or some sort of trading strategy that they want to implement into this framework, it can be easily done. All they need to do is contact me and we can discuss what it would take to get that in there. And if they're interested in keeping that private, then that's fine. Just because a strategy is created doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be shared on the store. Obviously the framework's on the store, but these particular sub-strategies that interact within the framework, they can be proprietary if desired. So we'll just talk about standard I for now. This is basically the standard edge-based execution that's very similar to the target finder in Metro. And basically is looking for a minimum amount of edge, and if it finds it, it's going to try to execute. This next column stands for dynamic participation, and this is a pretty nifty feature, so I'll get into some detail here. When these strategies are running in standard mode, they are liquidity taking strategies only. This means they're watching the book, and if they find something that meets minimum edge criteria, they're going to try to remove that from the book. At no point in time are they resting orders or quotes or adding liquidity to the market in any way. Dynamic participation, however, allows you to operate in the complementary mode, which will add liquidity to the market. And it does this by outputting short duration limit orders at particular precise price points. So some of those global variables that I glossed over earlier control how dynamic participation works, but in essence, you have a rolling time window, which you can specify the duration of, and within that time window, Profiteer is constantly monitoring trading activity happening within these instruments. If it detects a burst of trading activity, which meets a minimum quantity threshold, that will trigger dynamic participation to produce a limit order at that price point, therefore inserting itself into the price stream. When operating in this manner, you can get a piece of action that you simply could not get in any other way. If you are running only in liquidity taking mode, these kind of trades are happening too fast in order for it to participate. However, in the liquidity making mode, by inserting that limit order into the price stream, you will get a piece of it. And by all accounts of this use in production, it has been a very valuable feature. So if we look at this dropdown, there are three options for configuring the dynamic participation. You can have it off, which basically is the default mode in which standard I is liquidity taking only. You can have it also, which means that you have both aspects running together at the same time. It would both remove liquidity and it would add liquidity via the precisely inserted limit orders. Or only, which means that you are only running in the dynamic participation mode and it would not be running in the standard liquidity taking mode. Now, these limit orders, the duration that they are out there can also be configured, and typically it's a very short duration, and then they're automatically canceled and pulled out if they haven't been hit in that time, and they're also automatically pulled if the underlying moves, etc. Some of these more advanced details I'll cover in the documentation, so I'm not going to get too deep into it here. The parameter set name, which is the next column, this allows you to set up a parameter set name for the standard I, and that will be in this next grid right here. Each of the strategies has a separate subgrid which contains the unique configuration variables for that particular strategy. So you'll give it a name here. Let's say we call it bond configuration. And we'll see how that maps over to this grid in a little bit. Side, here you have the option to choose on what side you want the strategy to be executing on. You can have it simply buy, sell, buy and or sell. And this last option here is useful. It's closeout position, which basically means it's monitoring your real-time position and it's only executing in a manner which is closing out your positions. And also you can buy Vega or Gamma or sell Vega or Gamma. And the actual thresholds for what constitutes the Gamma or Vega that you're interested in can be set in those global configuration variables. So with this dropdown, you have pretty good control about how your overall position will be changed as this executes. For the sake, we'll just say buy and or sell. And the next column is hedge behavior. So you can say none, which means there's no hedging behavior done, or you could select one of these others. In this case, we have a Freeway hedge request or a Metro hedge request. So if you set Metro hedge request, it's actually going to pump the hedge request out to Metro's auto hedger mission, and then that will be doing the hedging for you. If you said Freeway, then another Freeway job, such as the auto hedger I mentioned in the first part of the video, that can be handling the hedging for you in a configurable fashion. This last column here is desired quantity, and here's where you put in the total quantity at which you'd like to execute. So let's say we put in 75 here. So it's important to note that this desired quantity is the absolute maximum that this particular row, when activated, could ever execute. You will never overshoot this number. The Profiteer engine keeps track of what quantities have been executed and what quantities are currently in play, whether they're in play by IOCs that the standard I is firing out in order to remove a trade or remove liquidity from the book, or whether it's by short duration limit orders that dynamic participation is putting out. This 75 is an absolute maximum. It will never get surpassed. And once you reach 75, this row will automatically deactivate and shut itself off. So whatever number you put in here, you can be assured that you will never overshoot this, no matter how many orders are out at once or how intense the trading activity gets. So I'm going to hit apply changes to send these to the database. Now, all the changes in the grid here, these are being saved to the database. Once you end the job or the job ends, everything in here will be saved to the database so that the next time you start up, you won't have to re-enter all this stuff. It is persisted. This last column here is delete, which if you click this and hit apply, we could delete this row. And I guess I didn't discuss these two columns yet. Label, you can give this a user-friendly label. You could say could name it anything you like for your own convenience. And lastly, this active checkbox allows you to turn the algo on. Now, I'm going to try to turn it on, and I know it's not going to work because we haven't set up this yet, but let's just try it because I want to show you how you'd be able to figure out what's happening on an error situation. So you hit apply changes, and well, the checkbox didn't take. So let's go look at the log. So we see here, looking at the log here, error for the standard I for the bond options, no row bond config was found in the parameter grid. Okay, so it gave us a nice error message just telling us that basically we didn't configure everything correctly yet. So this parameter set name for standard I, we need to configure that in the standard I grid. So let's go over to here. And here's where we enter the same thing. Let me expand this column. And so we can see that bond config here matches bond config here. So this row is going to go use this set of parameters for this mapping right here. So here we have our minimum edge and ticks. Let's say we want half a tick of edge. And now we get to look at some of these other features here. So this minimum underlying quantity field is another useful feature that doesn't exist in the Metro Target Finder. And how it works is basically the Profiteer engine will be monitoring the underlying future and checking the size on the bid and ask of that future against the value that you put here. And if the quantity on that side is less than this value, it will cause the Profiteer to widen that side out by 1 tick. And it will use that widened price as the underlying price when it computes the theoreticals for the option. The effect of this is that by entering a reasonable number here, you basically give yourself a greater assurance that you're going to be able to get that hedge. If there's a bid or ask showing on the future that's a 1 lot, your chances of getting that as a hedge are not very good. And so by setting this to a reasonable number, the Profiteer is actually computing the real values, the real cost of hedging, and therefore reducing your chances of a blown hedge. This column right here, minimum order quantity, this allows you to put in the minimum size of any order that it produces. This would be either for the IOCs in liquidity taking mode or the limit orders on the liquidity making side. And you could set this to a value, greater than 1 if for whatever reason you didn't want to fiddle around with anything less than 5. You could ensure that all your orders are at least 5. And also on the other side, you can put in a maximum. Say you put 20 here. The effect of this is that no single order will ever be generated for less than 5 or more than 20 quantity. And so if we look at this number 20 here and compare it to the 75 here, what this basically means is that we're never going to have one order to try to take out all 75. By setting 20 here, we're pretty much guaranteeing ourselves that we're going to get 4 orders in order to fill this desired amount of 75. So by setting this to an amount less than that 75, we can basically influence the minimum number of distinct trades that must occur in order to meet our desired quantity. And if you were okay with executing one big trade to meet all your desired quantity, you could certainly put 75 here and go for one big one. That's up to you about how you want to spread your trading activity or your risk. This aggressive feature is another cool feature that's not available on the Target Finder side. And basically, if you set this to yes, you can just put a Y in there. If you want, you could also go to the formatting here and make this a checkbox. Basically, this is an on or off feature, and if it's activated, it allows the Profiteer engine to use a second order Taylor series approximation to the change in the option price as the underlying shifts. And so by doing this, you allow a performance enhancement. You allow the Profiteer lower latency, because on any change in the underlying, it can go through the entire family of overlying options, and it can apply this second order Taylor approximation to the last price, and it can come up with the new options price without hitting the theoretical cache. And what this does is allows you to react faster than you would otherwise. And the error in this approximation is very small, oftentimes less than 1 part per million. So it's a very safe feature, and there's really no reason why you wouldn't put yes in this box. It's going to basically allow the Profiteer engine to react even faster than normal, and there's very little, if any, downside to using this. So I recommend putting yes in this box in all cases. And here we have the dynamic participation trigger quantity. So this value is really only relevant if dynamic participation is enabled in some fashion, which means that this particular value for this mappings grid was either also or only. And then the number that you put here is the minimum trading quantity that needs to happen in that rolling time window before the Profiteer will be willing to consider taking part. These last two fields, account override, here you can assign this particular parameter set to use a certain trading account. You can put whatever you want there, or you can leave it blank and just use the default trading account that's configured for the job instance. And delete, this should be, you can make this into a checkbox if you want using the wrench, but you could just put yes here, and if you applied it, it would delete the row. So let's not do that for here. And we can hit apply changes and submit these changes to the database. So now if we go back to our row here and we click activate, we should see that this mappings row, this standardized strategy instance, actually does go live. So let's go look at the log, and we see that It subscribed to 3 calls, and that was after delta filtering. So our 122 calls narrowed down to just 3 calls when we did the 40 to 60 delta filter on that. And here we see the list of matching instruments. Here are the 3 calls that matched. This is just for informational reasons, and it tells you their deltas next to them. So we got a 48 delta, a 42 delta, and a 55 delta. And it subscribed to the underlying future. And here is a couple error messages that we're seeing, and these are just because I haven't set up my volatility curve yet for this particular month and symbol, and that's why we're getting some warning messages here. And basically what that means is that these particular instruments are not going to be tradable. The Profiteer will actually discard them because it recognizes that it can't compute valid theoreticals if the curve has not been set up. And so basically it is live right now. Now the market's not open at the time I'm making this video, so we're not really going to see any activity happening here. But if the market was open, you would start to see some lines coming in as it's analyzing, as it's scanning. It's going to be producing some log lines here and there. And if a trade ever happens or an opportunity is detected, it's going to produce a detailed report output talking about what it found and what it's going to do about that. And it will also produce a lot of information that goes along with that, like the Greeks and some of the other computed values that could be useful for debug purposes. So we could also configure other mapping grid rows to run concurrently with the algorithm that we just activated. So for example, if we go to our mappings grid here, and let's say that we're interested in some bond strategies this time. As for strategies, and so let's say we're looking at some covereds, and we see we have 7,300 something that match. We can put in the March 2014, and then that will drop down to, looks like 135 here. And it's always a smart idea to be as specific as you can in this matcher editor, simply because the more specific you are here, the less volume of messages the Profiteer has to deal with. Even if you are doing additional filtering over here, like delta filtering, it's always good to be as specific as you can here. I'm just going to do some pretty generic settings here. I could use bond config again here if I wished. And in that case, we would map to the same parameter set we already set up. But in this case, I'm going to show an example of how we could get more specific. And here I'll do the bonds covered config. And I'm going to copy this to my clipboard, Control C. And enter in some numbers here. And we can call these the March 2014 bond covereds. Apply those changes, and of course we now got to set up our new row here. Paste that in there, and say here we're only looking for a quarter a tick, and minimum underlying quantity we really don't care, and we could do, you know, 5 and 50, yes, 100. And so we can have a different set of parameters here for that other row. So we'll apply those, get that into the database. And now, if we run over here, we can actually activate both these at the same time. And so if we take a look at the log, we can see that here's our list of covereds that it picked up, and because I have a config variable telling the Profiteer to report them all, it will actually list them all out. I think it's like 3 per row or something. So here we got a big list of our covereds, and it subscribed to some futures here, and then it got to our call mapping, and it picked up our 3 again with that delta filtering. And so we're in play right now. Now the market's closed, like I said, so we're not going to have any extra activity for me to show you here. But this is all it takes to get up and running. Simply set up your mappings, set up your parameters, and you're live. And this thing is ready to go. So in closing, maybe I'll discuss the performance of the Profiteer as opposed to the Metro Target Finder. Sometimes people ask me, what's the difference? And it's very difficult to give a objective quantitative number when you're testing an entire system with a lot of uncontrollable factors. However, based on anecdotal evidence from some clients already using this in production and my own experience and from discussions with the Option City developers, it does seem that the Profiteer is capable of generating a much higher volume of activity than the Target Finder. The Target Finder really is optimized for scanning only a handful of instruments, and as soon as you get to a couple dozen or more, and you can see from our last example that it doesn't take much to easily get into the hundreds or thousands of instruments, that's where Freeway really shines. And also the dynamic participation feature is capable of generating a lot of trades that the Target Finder would never be able to generate simply because it doesn't operate in that mode. So in conclusion, we do see a significant increase in execution capability delivered by the Profiteer as compared to the Target Finder, and I expect any person who's used the Target Finder would be pleasantly surprised by the activity they can generate using the Profiteer. So that's about it for now. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to contact me. My email address is kevin@axonetric.com. And if you have any questions regarding Freeway or Metro in general, please contact Option City, and have a great day. Thanks.